Hi there everyone, Josiah here with Womprat Creations, and it is time for something completely different. This week I need to do some mold making, and I've already done a video on how to do a two-part mold, but this one's a little different. I need to make a mold of this. I need to make copies of this, which means I need to mold it. And I'm not really going to get into what this is just yet because I'm going to do a whole nother video on the actual prop build using this. But I need to make a copy of this. I need to make a couple copies of this. And this is a pretty big object. And if I made this as a two-part mold and then filled it with resin, this would be one solid block of resin. It would be really heavy and a huge waste of material. So today I am going to be making a brush up mold so that I can rotocast a couple copies of this. And I'm going to get into the specifics of those terms as we go. But a brush up mold is a mold that you brush on and build up thin layers over time so that you don't have a huge chunk of silicone around this thing, because that's also a waste of material. And then we'll have to make a mother mold over that. Like I said, I'm going to be going into more detail as we go. But what this will allow me to do when I'm casting is create a thin shell and then leave the inside of this hollow, which is precisely what I need for this. So for that, I've already done a little bit of prep work on this. I didn't bother filming it because that's not really what this video is about. I'm going to show you guys how I do a brush up mold, and then we'll do a little bit of rotocasting at the end. So the first thing that you want to do is make sure that whatever it is that you're molding is really clean. You want to make sure there's no dust, no surface imperfections. Everything that is on the surface of this is going to be captured in your mold. So you want to make your master as clean as possible. Now, it's important to remember when mold making that you need to think ahead. You need to think ahead more so with mold making than almost any other operation, because if you don't, you can waste a lot of material. And I'm going to be honest, some mold making stuff is kind of expensive. It's not the cheapest material out there. So what you want to take into consideration is what orientation you want to mold this, where you want your pour spout, which is where you're going to be pouring in your resin, and all kinds of stuff like that. When you're making molds, you kind of need to think upside down and backwards, because if you have any ledges in your buck, like something like this little piece that hangs off at a 90-degree angle, that could be a problem for demolding your stuff. So I think with this, these will actually be fine. So what I'm actually going to do is I want this surface to be good. I don't want to have to do any kind of finishing work on this. So I don't want the pour spout over here. This is this and this are the hero side of this prop. So I don't want to have the pour spout over here or over here. I could have it on the bottom because it'll sit like this. I could have it on the bottom, but I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to have it in the back. That ensures that no one will see it, and I don't really need this to be a solid piece for the build. So the first thing that I'm going to do is construct a little, well, am I going to use styrene? I'm going to make something that this can sit up on so that when I'm molding it, it's not touching the workbench or anything like that, and that doesn't get captured in my mold. And it will also serve as creating a pour spout for later on when I'm doing, when I'm casting. I know, this might all just be gobbledygook to you guys right now, but it's gonna make more sense as we go, so bear with me. Okay, so I figured out what I'm going to be putting this on. I'm going to put it on my Lazy Susan here. By the way, invest in a Lazy Susan. I can't tell you, I mean, I use this mainly for painting things. I'll put it on here so that I can move it around and use it to paint, but it'll work really well for this too. I'm going to use this chunk of wood for to attach my my master to this, and then that will double as my pour spout, because when I do the mold, I'll mold the entire prop plus a little bit of this wood. Then when when I take the silicone off of this and I go to pour resin in it, this hole will still be there, and this will be a nice big hole for me to pour resin into. So I need to attach that to that, and I think for that I'm just going to use some hot glue. That should be more than enough to, here it is. That should be more than enough to secure that without damaging this and giving me a secure enough hold through the molding process. If I if this was like a heavier piece, because I've gutted this thing, all of the insides are out, so it's not very heavy, but if I was really worried about this coming off, I could screw this into that, but it's not necessary for this. I'm just going to use some hot glue. What can I be doing while that is heating up? Guess I can get out my silicone. I've already covered the basics of working with silicone. There's a bunch of different types. I'll get into the type that I'm going to be using for this, but if you are new to mold making, you should really check out my first video on mold making. It is for a two-part mold, but I go into the specifics of different, I go more in depth about different types of silicones, what you want to be using, and I actually ended up, because I didn't have the right type of silicone on hand for that one, I ended up using the silicone I'm going to be using for this one, but this is actually the correct application for this type of silicone, so got that going. So yeah, while that's heating up, I'll get out all of that stuff, prep that, and then we'll get to molding. And like I said, this is going to be kind of a two-part process. Doing a brush-on mold is kind of it's like a 2-day ordeal, and we'll get into that. But you have to do a couple layers of silicone, and then you got to do some other stuff afterwards. So it's kind of involved, but that's okay. That's all right. I'm excited for this. It's actually been a minute since I've done a brush-up mold. And I used to do them all the time, so I'm excited to be doing it again. All right, so I have my master on its pedestal. Everything is clean, ready to go, and I have all of my stuff out. So I'll get into all of it in a second. But first of all, I'm using Smooth On Rebound 25. Yes, Rebound 25. This stuff is specifically made for brush-on molds, and really the only thing that means is it's a thicker silicone. It doesn't run as much. So that allows you to brush it onto a surface, and it'll pull down a little bit, but for the most part, it's gonna stay where I put it. And then I have something else that I'm going to have to add to it later to really thicken it up. But the first layer, because like I said, we're going to have to do this in layers, because we're going to put on a thin layer to capture all of the detail. Then we'll put on maybe two more layers after that, where it's still kind of out of the bucket, so to speak, just to kind of build up a little bit of a thickness. Then I'm going to be adding something else to the silicone to really thicken it up, so that I can build up a a relatively thick layer of silicone all the way around this thing, and then I'm gonna have to let it completely dry. So this stuff is super easy to work with. I did use this for my mold of the Beskar ingot. So you saw that this is pretty thick stuff, but it's really easy to mix. This is mixed at a 1-to-1 volume or weight ratio. So for that, I'm just gonna be using the volume. I have these containers with different measurements marked on here. I'm not exactly sure how much I'm gonna be using for this yet, for each layer. But yeah, super easy to work with. Other silicones sometimes have different ratios that you have to mix it with as far as a part A and part B. And it really just depends on what your what silicone you're using. So make sure that you read through the directions completely. I'm pretty sure that this thing has a, let's see, pot life is 20 minutes, cure time is 6 hours. So what that means is pot life is how long it can be in the cup before you can't really use it anymore. So that means I have 20 minutes to get, once both parts are combined in the cup, I have about 20 minutes before it'll be too thick to really work with. So I have about 20 minutes to mix it and get it onto my, my master, which is a lot of time. I've used some silicones that are, they cure very quickly. I've had some that have like a 6-minute pot life. That can be kind of stressful, but this is perfect for this. It gives me time to get everything on there and make sure everything is set up before it starts to cure. Then you want to let it cure for, not all the way, but it's kind of like when you're using contact cement, how you want to wait until it's tacky but not sticky. I'm gonna let it cure for about an hour on the master, just because I found that that's a fairly good time with this silicone. So I'll give it about an hour, and then I'll follow up with the next layer of silicone and so on. The reason that you don't want to just go all out at once, or you don't want to put on your next layer too quickly, is because you don't want to disturb the layer below. If you do it too quickly, you can start to tear up the layer below it, and then it's just going to be a mess. So I found that with this, an hour is a pretty good estimate of the amount of time to wait between layers. It is kind of cold in here, so that might affect the time a little bit, but if anything, that should prolong it. It shouldn't shorten it. If it was hot in here, it would probably shorten the time a little bit, but I'll kind of play it by ear and see how it goes. So first thing is, I need to decide how much I'm going to make, and the first layer is a detail layer. So it's going to be the one layer that I really want to make sure gets into all the crevices and all of that. So for that, once I mix it up, I'm going to use this chip brush to kind of stipple it all over and just make sure that I'm using the brush to actually push it into crevices and corners. Because like I said, this silicone is a little thicker. You want to make sure that you don't get any air bubbles in between your silicone and your model. So I'll use my chip brush to kind of stipple it and push it into any deep crevices or anything like that. Yeah, so let's get pouring. All right, that's looking pretty good. So now I'm just going to take my chip brush and I'm going to get some on there and just start stippling it on there. And any kind of little lip that I see, I'm going to make sure that I pack some silicone in there. This doesn't need to be a thick layer. In fact, you kind of want this to stay fairly thin so that you know that you're not trapping any air bubbles. So So don't worry about building up any kind of thickness on this layer. You're just trying to get a thin coat over the whole surface. Yeah, these lips up top are the ones that I'm worried about. So those are definitely the ones that I'm going to focus on. Making sure I get good coverage. Alright, so I have a pretty good stipple coat on there. I'm going to let that dry for a little bit, but I have a bunch of leftover silicone, and that was kind of on purpose. I mean, I was kind of guessing at how much I'm going to need, but I did need a little extra on this first one, and that is because I need to make some mold keys, and I'll get into the point of them later, but the long and short of it is I'm going to put just a little bit of silicone into the bottom of these little cups, and it's going to give me a usable shape for later. All right, so I have my stipple coat on there. I have just a little bit, looks like about ½ an ounce in each one of these little cups. I'm gonna let this all sit for about an hour, and then I'll see you guys then. All right, so it's actually been about 2 hours. I didn't realize how much the cold would affect this, but the way that you can tell that it's ready for the next layer is you can touch some of the silicone that'll run off. And if it's sticky, but it's not coming up on your finger, it's still staying intact, that's when you know that it's time to put on the next layer. So, second one is the same as the first. Well, except for you don't need to be as... I'm still going to be stippling it, but actually because of that, I need to grab a brush. All right, so I'm still going to be kind of stippling it on there, but you don't need to be as precious as the first one. This is kind of more of an insurance of like just making sure that all the detail gets captured before we start going on to a little more thicker layers. And I don't need as much silicone in this one, or on this layer, because I got my keys already. I don't need to worry about that. And I don't want to waste too much of this. Alright, so the third coat of silicone is on there. It's just about done. And so now we're going to be doing the thickened layer. And for that, I'm going to be mixing it just like before, but I'm also going to be adding just a little bit of Thibex. This is Smooth-On's thickening agent. It's just a clear liquid that you add to silicone, and it makes it thicker. And the reason I need to do this is so that I can start to build up some thick silicone around this, so that it's not just this really thin couple layers. So this will this is when it'll start building up pretty quickly. And actually, because I'm going to be doing I need more silicone to build up a thicker layer, I'm going to be mixing just a little bit more silicone. And I also, while I'm doing this, what was I going to say? What was I going to say? I don't remember, but yeah, I need to add on the thickened silicone so that we can start building up the actual thickness of our mold. And I'll maybe do 2 of these. We'll see how it goes. I might just need 1 thickened layer, but we'll see how much I can kind of build up on this. Alright, so the reason that I poured this silicone into these cups is after this is done, I need to make a mother mold over this, which is a hard shell that'll go on the outside of this. And I'll get more into why I need to do that in a minute, well, once I get to that part, but I need something to kind of lock the silicone into place in the mother mold. And so that is what these are for. These are just little silicone pucks that I'm going to attach to the outside of this mold. That way when everything cures, this will be a uniform part of the silicone, and then when I make my mother mold over this, these pucks will act as like keys that fit into the mother mold and lock it into place so that the silicone sits correctly in the mother mold. So I need to take all these out. All right, I have all of my little keys out of their cups. Now I have these little, everything is dusty in this shop. I have these little sewing pins that I'm going to use to actually stick these into the mold. And I'm trying to think of where I want them. I definitely want one here. And then you can just use the sewing pin to stick it in. And remember, this is still a wet this is still wet silicone on the outside, so I mean, it really kind of sticks by itself, but I just want to make sure that it doesn't shift at all. You can push it all the way down to your master underneath, and it's not gonna hurt anything. It's just a little pin. I need one on the other side. And they don't need to match up or anything, but I'm trying not to get too ahead of myself, because if I try to describe something without actually having it in front of me, it's just gonna be incoherent babbling. So I will make sure to give a really good explanation of these keys when we get to the point where I make the mother mold, or maybe right after. But know that this is the point in the process that you want to add your mold keys. This might be a video that you need to watch all the way through and then go back and take a look at something. You know, this would probably be a video that would actually benefit from me doing some beforehand planning. All right, you guys, so my silicone mold I let cure overnight. I don't remember what the full cure time was on the thing, but I let it sit overnight and then some. It's like lunchtime the next day. It is more than ready for the next step, and that next step is when I take the when I demold my master, when I take the silicone off of my master so that I can make a casting, it's just going to be silicone. And the silicone by itself is not structurally sound enough to keep the shape, especially once I put resin in there. Once I put resin in there, if I don't have anything holding it in position, it's just going to deform and it's going to look horrible. It's not going to look anything like what I cast. So I need to be able to have something, a hard shell on the outside to keep it in the shape that it's currently in. And the way that you do that is you construct a mother mold over your silicone mold. There's a lot of different materials and ways to do this, but my go-to, just because it's cheap and available, is fiberglass, along with some fiberglass cloth. Now I will say, if you're working with fiberglass, you should have a respirator. I don't have one. Or you could be in a well-ventilated area, and that I do have. This is a pretty well-ventilated area. So I will also say though, you can see I'm already kind of itching myself because I've done a little bit of prep, but fiberglass is nasty stuff. You don't want to be breathing it in, and you want to minimize the amount that it gets over you. And you really don't want to be itching when it does. I'm really bad at not itching. But yeah, there's little shards, tiny little shards of glass, essentially. And it's nasty stuff, so be careful when you're using it. But you may have noticed that my mold has this weird cardboard going on here. That is because and that's just specific for this mold. It kind of depends on what you're molding. But with this, if I did just one hard shell over this whole shape, I wouldn't be able to get it back out once I have a casted piece in there. So I have to do it in two halves. That way I can split them apart and then demold the casting. So for that, I just took some scrap cardboard that I had laying around. I cut out the approximate shape of the mold. I split it in half, and then I used some duct tape on the other side to kind of keep it in place. It doesn't need to be perfect, but it needs to relatively cut the shape in half. I've used this method many times before, and it works just fine. There are much better ways to do it. You can use clay to build a dividing wall around, which I've done in the past, but I don't have any more clay laying around. Plus, that's a lot of work. Yeah, it's a lot of work. So I just use some cardboard, and that should work fine. Normally, I am always running out of things. I am out of spray release. Spray release is an aerosol agent that you spray onto something when you don't want like silicone to stick to it, but I found that it also works fairly well with fiberglass. I don't have any on hand, but that's okay because it's not really going to stick to the silicone. Silicone is really nice in that it really only sticks to itself, which is why it's such a wonderful molding agent. But yeah, I'll be able to put the fiberglass on here, and it will not permanently bond to the silicone, and it will kind of bond to the cardboard, but because it's cardboard, I can just rip it off of the fiberglass. There may be some remnants, but that's fine. It doesn't. The only point of the mother mold is to hold my silicone mold in its current shape when it doesn't have anything holding it from the inside. That is also why I have these keys sticking out of the side, because I need to make sure that after I've done the mother mold, I take everything off and I liberate my master from the silicone mold. I need to make sure that I can put the silicone mold into the fiberglass mother mold in the right orientation and make sure that it's all held in the right place. That's what the keys do. The keys are going to be like plugs that fit into holes in my mother mold, letting me know that the silicone is in the right spot. It's all filled out in the right spaces inside the mother mold. So, I'm done babbling. Let's get to some fiberglass. All right, I have 1/2 of my fiberglass mother mold constructed, and I have already removed the cardboard from the other side. And I know there's a little bit sticking to the fiberglass. That's actually okay. I don't mind that. It actually gives me a really nice, relatively smooth, uniform surface to put the other half on. Now, I did not think of this until now, because like I said, it's been a while since I have made one of these molds. Like I told you, the fiberglass is not going to stick to the silicone, but fiberglass will stick to other fiberglass. So normally what I would do here is I would spray down some spray release that I was talking about earlier, so that when I put on the back half of the fiberglass, it wouldn't stick to this. But I don't have any, so I am going to use an alternative, and I am going to brush on a small amount of Vaseline onto the cardboard right here, so that it just has a thin layer between this and the new half of fiberglass. So hopefully that should do the trick. I've used it before, not for fiberglass. I've used it for a release agent between 2 layers of silicone. So I don't know how well this is going to work. I'm probably going to put a little bit more on than I did for the silicone, but I still don't want a bunch. You don't want a ton on there. That's just going to be a mess, and I really don't want to have to deal with that. So I'm going to just use a paintbrush to put on a thin layer of Vaseline around. I think I actually have Aquaphor. It's all the same thing. Thin layer of Aquaphor on this half of the mother mold. That way, hopefully, I don't have too much problems prying the two apart. You're always going to have to kind of work to get them pulled apart, and but hopefully that gives me just enough to kind of wiggle through. So yeah, let's get on to that. So guess what? I thought I hit record and I did this beautiful time lapse of me demolding my master and getting the two fiberglass shells apart and liberating my master from the mold and putting it all back together, and I didn't hit record. But that's okay. Wasn't a particularly exciting shot anyways, but all I did was once both fiberglass halves were cured, I pried them apart with a screwdriver. I trimmed up the edges so that I don't accidentally cut myself. I drilled 4 holes so that I could put them back together with a bolt and a wing nut so that it's easy to do by hand. And then I took the 2 halves of the fiberglass mold apart. I took the master out of the silicone, made sure that the silicone was good and ready to go, and then I put it back into the fiberglass shells and hand fastened these quarter 20 bolts and wing nuts so that it all stays together, and it was a beautiful, beautiful shot. But now I have this empty silicone mold, and you can see that the two plugs on each side plug into the fiberglass, and it keeps it all in orientation inside there. So my mold is held in the correct relationship with itself, and that is done by the fiberglass. Now what I need to do is get to casting. Now, I'm sure that you cannot see into the mold, but you can see that I have this big square opening here. That is so that I have a nice pour spout to pour my silicone in there. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take, I'll tell you about the resin I'm gonna use in a minute, but essentially the idea with roto-casting, slush casting, it's all the same thing. I'm gonna pour a little bit of silicone in there, and I'm gonna move this around so that it coats the inside of the silicone mold. Then, once it starts to harden up a little bit, I'm gonna follow it up with another layer, and I'll do the same thing. It kind of depends on how many layers I do, but I'm gonna do that so that I can build up a thickness on the inside of the silicone mold, but not filling it up all the way. That way, when it's done, I'll have a nice shell of the outside of this and not just a full resin pour that would be really heavy and a waste of material. So this resin that I'm going to be using is smooth cast onyx. This stuff is great for roto-casting because it cures very quickly. A lot of resins take a long time to cure, and that means that I would be sitting here doing this, rotating it, making sure that not one area pools too much for a long time. And that gets, I mean, this isn't particularly heavy, but doing this for a while, trying to make sure that that is gonna be tiresome. And it would take all day. So this smooth cast onyx is perfect for this. It cures very, very quickly. What is the cure time on this? It doesn't say on that one. What is the cure time on this? Pot life is 2.5 minutes and cures in 10 minutes. And I don't really need it to cure all the way. I just need it to set up enough. So this is the first casting I'm going to be doing with this mold. And like I said before in my previous molding and casting video, each mold is different. You kind of have to learn the intricacies of your particular mold. So first one might come out great or it might come out horrible. You never really know. I'm going to try my best to make a good casting so that I can show you guys exactly what it is that I'm talking about, but we'll see how it goes. These, if I can get these apart, I have a couple of these clear plastic cups that have measurements marked on them. I'll use this to measure out my 2 parts because this does come in 2 parts, just like almost everything else from Smooth On. And this is also very easy to mix. It is mixed 1-to-1 by volume, or by volume. So you also don't want to mix a ton for each layer. If you get too much, then you start to get stuff pooling and you get thin parts and thick parts in your casting. It'll kind of make more sense once I'm done, but I'm going to set up, I'm going to set up a little bit wider of a shot so that you guys can see everything. I'm going to go through a whole casting in time lapse, and then once it's done curing, I'll break it out of the mold, and I'll be able to show you guys the breaking down of the mold finally, and we will see how the first casting goes. In 10 minutes. And I don't really need it to cure all the way. I just need it to set up enough. So this is the first casting I'm going to be doing with this mold, and like I said before in my previous molding and casting video, each mold is different. You kind of have to learn the intricacies of your particular mold. So first one might come out great or it might come out horrible. You never really know. I'm going to try my best to make a good casting so that I can show you guys exactly what it is that I'm talking about, but we'll see how it goes. These, if I can get these apart, I have a couple of these clear plastic cups that have measurements marked on them. I'll use this to measure out my 2 parts because this does come in 2 parts, just like almost everything else from Smooth On. And this is also very easy to mix. It is mixed 1-to-1 by volume, or by volume. So you also don't want to mix a ton for each layer. If you get too much, then you start to get stuff pooling and you get thin parts and thick parts in your casting. It'll kind of make more sense once I'm done, but I'm going to set up, I'm going to set up a little bit wider of a shot so that you guys can see everything. I'm going to go through a whole casting in time lapse, and then once it's done curing, I'll break it out of the mold, and I'll be able to show you guys the breaking down of the mold finally, and we will see how the first casting goes. All right, you guys, my first casting is done, and this actually came out pretty decently. The only thing that I can really see is because I had to split this mold up the side in order to get the casting out afterwards, it's kind of fickle trying to get this put back exactly right and into the mother mold. So I did get a little bit of flashing along that seam, but that'll be easy enough to clean up. I'm not too worried about it. The only other thing that I would say didn't quite work out just right on this first casting is I didn't let enough of the resin pool on the lip right by the pour spout, and because of that it's a little thin right around here. But I mean, this is still more than enough thickness for what I need, and this is I'm actually going to be able to use this casting for the eventual build that this will be a part of. So that is perfect. I hope you guys got an idea of how brush-on molds and rotocasting takes place. Molding and casting is such a case-by-case basis that there are many decisions that have to be made whenever you're molding a new object. Even something that's a relatively simple object like this does take some forethought, and if you're not careful, you can run into some snags. So really take the time to think through the correct way to mold whatever it is you're doing. But I think I did a fairly decent job of covering the basics of how this kind of molding and casting operation works. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Until next time, I'll see you guys later. Hey there, superstar. You just watched that whole video. I don't know how you did it. I can't listen to me for that long. You deserve something awesome in return for listening to me talk for that long. You can head over to wompratcreations.com and pick yourself up some awesome Womprat merch, just like this Tatooine travel shirt that I'm wearing right now. Looks pretty nice, right? Thanks, guys.
517 to scanner control. 517 to scanner control. 316, report to control. 53 to upper bay door. 53 to upper bay door.